afternoon, everybody. I'd like to extend you a warm welcome to this afternoon's program where we are talking with leaders of the BMF on what the BMF looks like beyond 2021. And in just opening, I'd like to give a big thank you to the platform being provided by the PEC of the Eastern Cape, the Black Management Forum in the Eastern Cape, led by Chairperson Uminti Makapela Nontsele, for this opportunity just to engage our senior leaders on the Black Management Forum and what it looks like beyond 2021. And we've got an esteemed panel of senior leaders of the organization who are experienced in their own right, both in business, in entrepreneurship, in corporate, and in leading the organization as it were. And in absentia, we would like to also welcome the president of the BMF, who was unable, unfortunately, to join us this afternoon. But I'm sure if he finds a moment in his travels to join or to peek in, he might do so. But in his absence, we also have the deputy president, Ms. Tasneem Fredericks. Thank you also for making time to engage in this conversation. We have as well former chairperson in the Eastern Cape, Uzizi. Baumfundo Chekeche, thank you as well for making yourself available to be one of the panelists to engage on some of the issues we'd like to unpack here this afternoon with members and with yourselves. Former chairperson in the Free State, Sis Lili, always a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for making the time. But Nicholas Maweni, MD, I know you as the MD, that's when I first met you, you were still MD of the organization, was always remained active within the organization, providing a contribution. Thank you, sir, for making the time as well to be here and to engage in this conversation. And of course, board member of the Black Management Forum, also fellow board member in the fund, Ese Tumangotwa, thank you as well for also availing yourself to engage on this very important topic. We're all aware of the context of this conversation, and to have all your voices on the table as we talk about the Black Management Forum, where it is and where it should be going. We really do appreciate the time. And I see as well, Mpo has also joined, Mpo Moseki, also former chairperson of the Black Management Forum in Gauteng. Thank you for joining and listening in. And then should you want to say a word or two, you can just drop us a message in the chat as we engage our panelists on these issues. So ladies and gentlemen, just a quick run through of how we're going to go about this conversation. And our panelists are aware of some of the issues we would like to unpack. And we will facilitate a conversation around some of those issues and try to get into the meat of the matter. Keep the conversation narrow, but try and find some depth in these. So when we leave here, we have an understanding of where we are as an organization and hear from our leaders where we should be and how do we respond to the many interests of our members beyond 2021. An important moment for reflection as we celebrate 45 years of the Black Management Forum. Again, thanks to the PEC of the BMF in the Eastern Cape, Sis Minty, you and your team, for allowing us to have this conversation and for creating the platform for it to happen. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it being a Sunday afternoon, if you would allow me, I would like to get straight into the meat of the matter by addressing or by calling upon our panelists to make some words, which will facilitate with a question as a springboard. We will have time towards the end of the program to have some engagement from our attendees and to ask some questions. And so if you do have a question, you want to jot it down so that you don't forget, feel free to use the chat function to do so. And when we get to the Q&A section, you can raise your virtual hand and you'll be noted and given an opportunity to voice that question should you want to voice it yourself and not have it read out in the Q&A box or either in the chat box. All of these avenues are available to you to engage in this conversation. And as we said, we're going to talk briefly about our strategic direction as the BMF, assess where we are. We're going to talk about the BMF member. Who are they? Who have they become? And are we meeting their interests? And how do we meet their interests moving forward? And then talk a little bit tactically. Where should we be positioned? What role should we be playing in society, and what lessons have we learned? And then I think it appropriate then, just to get straight into the conversation, to call on you, TP, and to perhaps reflect a little on the term that has been, on as to where we are as an organization. And then briefly again, just to talk a little bit about what is the mission of the organization as it enters its 5th decade. What are we trying to achieve in your view? And of course, beginning with just a brief reflection on where we are and then how we're doing in terms of achieving our objectives. Over to you, my leader.
Thank you. I'm just checking my mute setting. So good afternoon. Firstly, welcome and good afternoon to my BMF friends and family. I'm very happy that you said we're having a conversation. So to me, this is almost like, our family meetings that we've become accustomed to. And then we get a synopsis at the end. And sometimes people are saying, you know what, I'm not going to that meeting. I just want to know what level are we on now? And, how many numbers can we now go to weddings and funerals, etc. So, I mean, for me, it's this organization is a developmental organization. So our blueprint is not going to be, as much as we are an NPC and we abide by MOIs and we abide by company laws and King 4s and all of that, we need to really understand who we are firstly as an organization, our identity. And in understanding who we are, we then need to say, well, if we can't immediately say who we are, do we know who we are not? So sometimes it's more important to ask the right questions so that one can ponder, reflect, ruminate, than it is to chase after an answer. So as much as you're saying, what is the mission of the organization? I mean, for me broadly, and the other panelists will unpack it more, but I mean, everybody in the BM knows, everybody in this country knows that we want, as Black people, socio-economic justice, okay? The reason we have laws in this country that promotes the majority rights in the country is because, in a sense, we are the economic minority. And for as long as we are the economic minority, it doesn't help that we have this majority kind of power. It becomes almost meaningless in a sense when we are unable to account for the large percentages of unemployment. And when we look at who the unemployed are, it's, Black people. And then 50% of this 40-odd% number is between the ages of 18 and 35. So in addition to being aware, we don't operate in a bubble. BMF operates within the context of a bigger, wider South Africa. So when we talk about issues of socioeconomic justice, it's not what we're going to do for our members. By extension, it's this is country service. What are we doing as members in our organization for a bigger purpose, South Africa? So the bigger company, the bigger shareholder is, how do we affect change so that it's not just there for us as BMF members, so that we obsessed with what is it that we as BMF members can get out of BMF, and how's BMF going to get us a job, and how's BMF going to get us on boards, and how's BMF going to link us up with the right people so we can get tenders. I've in the last session heard that there's a perception that BMF is about tenders and about getting into boards. But I mean, I would like to say that as a BMF that I've personally seen evolve from as early as 2011 on a national level, how have we worked and become what we were and what we want to be, and what we now are. And I think it's always summed up. We all know that we start from when we established in the there's always these 10-year brackets, so I know that there was the era from 1970 to 1980, and we talk about that being the genesis of the BMF, the organization of Black people. And then we have the 1980 to the 1990s, which can probably be best described as the advocacy phase. And so we move on to 1990 to 2000, 2010 and beyond. And now we find ourselves in 2021. And it's quite interesting. Duma, I want to say Duma now because I had a conversation with Duma earlier. It's quite interesting because when I look at that 35-year anniversary book, Nicholas, you were there, and the cover's got inside the cover, and it's quite nice because it's got all the members' names that were, you know, during that time, obviously members in good standing printed. And I looked for my name and I found it. And if you look at what happened, what we wrote about at our 35th year anniversary, and if we look at the fact that we used the Basotho hat 10 years ago, now we're bringing ourselves to 45 years. It's not actually yet the 5th decade, it's 45 years. So we're still in the 4th decade, I would say, leaning towards the 5th, of course. But 45 years on, we are still using the Basotho hats. We still haven't achieved what we said we were going to achieve 10 years ago. So I just want to put, you know, we talk about managing expectations. So certainly today is not going to be about making empty and false promises and saying where we're going to take the organization, because we now understand that structural change like racism, patriarchy, sexism, those things it was implemented centuries ago. So it's going to take centuries to dismantle. It's not going to, there's no silver bullet solution. So when I say I looked at where we were at our 35th anniversary, and I look at where we are on our 45th anniversary, and I see that at least there's been not so much progress, but preservation. At least to me, we haven't really reversed as an organization. So I want to stop there, Kuma. I don't know if I've answered you specifically, but this to me is just a general opening to say where I feel as a member, having worked under various presidents and this issue of continuity, the mission and vision is always going to be the same, but each presidency comes in with their own strategy and their own board that will carry out that strategy. And every 3 years we change our strategy. Let's be honest. If we see ourselves in the next 45 years, then we need to have a 45-year blueprint. And then every 3 years, people can't want to have strategy sessions. What they should do is have strategic markings. You know, how are you monitoring what you say you're going to do? Because if you're not going to measure these things, you're not going to be able to manage it. So every 3 years, you're going to be in disarray. Every 3 years, you're going to want to reinvent the wheel, which is totally unnecessary, and probably why we are at a stage where we have this preservation as opposed to progression.
100% DP, and I think you've provided a firm foundation for what my next question would be. And I would like to pose this question to you, Nicholas, in the sense that in addressing what the DP has raised, the gaps that exist in terms of achieving what our strategic vision is, those are driven by people. And in the BMF, we say the creation of a BMF type manager become the soldiers which we can address some of the actual issues. Transformational leaders that will address racism and sexism.
Kuma, your audio is a bit muffled there. Can you please check your mic? Yeah.
How is it now, Itu? Am I audible?
Yeah, it's better now. Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of addressing some of these issues, one of BMF's strategic levers was creating the BMF type manager. If we accept that the BMF type manager exists, and maybe some BMF type managers aren't necessarily BMF members, are we doing enough, one, to attract those people into the organization to work on this mission and on this strategy? And how are we doing on that score once they're inside the organization to further embed this BMF DNA that we use as a strategic lever to address some of these issues?
Kuma, you were faint when you were saying you're going to address this question to X person, so we don't actually know who you're addressing the question.
I was addressing it to Nicholas.
Oh, okay. I beg your pardon. Thank you. Thanks very much, Kuma. Thanks for that one. And maybe just to build on what Tasneem has already alluded. I guess at the core, we are a membership organization, Kuma. It's a membership organization. And you've touched on this very important part in terms of what type of a member should BMF have. I don't think we should be gung on the issue that the member will change. the type of member will change and some of the needs of the members will change, but there will always be core in terms of that member. And for example, we've always believed within the BMF, we're looking for someone who really is very patriotic about their country and who understand that we are going through a transformation, even now in 2021, and someone who's really keen to partner in terms of nation building. That's some of the parts in terms of that type of a manager. A manager who really subscribes to the values of Ubuntu of the BMF, and of course with the key principles in terms of non-racialism and Afrocentrism and respect for the individuals and self-development and own initiatives. Now, when I mentioned, Kuma, the fact that it sometimes changes in terms of the needs will change because sometimes you have people that come in and go within BMF. We must allow that. We can't expect that the type of members that we should have in 2021 should be the same that we had 20 years ago, be different. And that was the reason why at some stage in BMF, I certainly remember this when I was the MD, is we started what we call the SMME, because we saw our members wanted us to go into that. It wasn't there, we only had corporate membership. We developed something along those lines. And purely because we needed to respond to the needs. We started doing a lot of training in terms of managerial leadership to some of the individual members as well, purely because that was a need. But one thing that I want to maybe focus on that is important here is the values of the organization will always be the same. And I think whatever we do, we must always subscribe to these values of the BMF. And at times, I tend to focus on the character of the individual member, because that, to me, is what needs to be developed. Before, sometimes you focus on the managerial leadership, focus on the character. Because at times, the kind of things that we've seen, we have heard, they do make us cringe when you realize that this person claims to be a member of this esteemed organization. And guess what is wrong is often that person's character has been found wanting. And so that to me is the most important thing, that as we go forward beyond 2021, we start looking at those issues, the character. It mustn't be, we must now focus on the quality versus quantity. There was a stage where we needed to rent a crowd. We've now got experience, we've seen that it doesn't really help. You could go through, rent a bus and all of that, maybe for the elections, as many try to do. But in the end, you end up attracting the wrong people within the organization who do not have the right character. And as a result of that, they will move the organization. And then we start talking about, well, what is a vision? The vision of the BMF is always very clear. Does it mean the BMF vision can change? It can change. We here, the people of BMF, we have the right to change the vision. We shouldn't really be worried and be stuck to it. It must respond to the needs on the ground. If we believe that the needs haven't changed, then maybe we need to go back and maybe realign some of that vision and make sure that at least it can still address the current issues. Tuma, I want to pause there so that we don't take too much time and allow my other fellow panelists an opportunity to weigh into this matter.
No, thank you very much for that, Nicholas, and point well taken. Maybe I can ask Lilia this follow-up question here. Considering what Nicholas has just said about the quality of membership, and that's something that we need to be talking about, what would you say is your assessment of the culture within the organization as a whole? And is that helpful towards us wanting to achieve our objectives? And how do we make those changes? How do we fix the culture? And I don't want to speak just necessarily on the behaviors of individual members where they sit, but the organization in a whole, in a way in which it creates environment for people to be expressive of themselves, to lead, to learn, as well as to take initiative in driving some of the things we want to achieve. How are we doing on that front?
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all the BMF members. I think you're giving me a critical question, because this is what comes up in almost every single AGM that we go through. we find ourselves asking the environment in which BMF is operating, the members that we have, are we creating an environment that is more conducive for the different types of members to be active? And when we're talking about members of BMF, we're not only talking about a specific type of members, we're talking about a wide genre of people. Are we creating an environment where we can have doctors be able to participate? Are we creating an environment where an engineer will be comfortable to be able to be in their own space and be part of this organization, where lawyers can come in? Is that environment enabling all the women and all the young professionals to be active and be part of this organization? And it becomes a challenge because when you are looking at our membership and the different types of members that we have and the activities that these members engage in, you find a lot of our members are coming and going. A lot of our members are not renewing their membership. So this is a question that we need to ask ourselves, that are we still serving what the members are looking for? Are we still creating an environment where different people from different genres of life can walk into that room and be able to have a conversation? Are we encouraging, are we facilitating that environment where there's respect amongst the members? And that is very, very important, because only in that environment will we be able to engage, will we be able to create that environment where there's advocacy, where there's lobby about the organization. Hence, the organization can move forward. So this is a problem that we have, and it starts particularly from the branch levels, because when you start looking at the leadership from the branch level, who are the chairpersons, who are the profcoms, who are the people that end up at the board, you often find that it is the same kind of people. It's the same kind of people that are just moving along the ranks within the organization. So we need to create an environment that is more opening, that is more conducive and more welcoming. And particularly, I don't want to speak more, but the issue of the gender parity, and you find that there's less women within the organization. You go to a national AGM and you find 80% of the people that are there are men. So how do we get women to become more involved? How do we get women to be part of this organization and to have a voice and to have a say? So that is very, very important. And at branch level, are we engaging on socio-economic issues within that particular branch before we can move over to national and before we can move over to the board level? But are we doing that at our branch level so that the people within those communities can see the benefits of BMF and can become part of benefit? So I think it's very important that at some point we need to do a self-evaluation as the BMF. We need to identify what kind of culture is operating within us, what kind of members do we have, and most importantly, are we encouraging these members to become part of this organization, to become active in this organization? Are we encouraging them to grow? Are we encouraging them to give their full potential to the BMF so that we can be able to reach that transformation we're talking about? Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Lily. Zizi, I want to come to you, and hopefully, I'm hoping that you can tie a neat bow around this conversation around the member for me here quite nicely. Nicholas has centered the character and the culture of the BMF member within the organization and how important that is. Lily asks some very important questions that we need to address in order to be able to build that that culture and to build that character within members. What does a member-centric organization mean to you, Zizi? And this is something as well you've expressed a view on a number of times. How do we answer some of these questions that Lily has asked?
Thank you, Program Director. My signal isn't so good, so if it doesn't come right, I'll have to just switch off the video. But maybe before I get to that answer, I also just want to touch on a bit on what the Deputy President spoke of. You know, I do buy into the adage that says to know where we're going, we need to know where we've been, and we also need to make sense of where we are to be able to sort of begin to imagine the future. So in thinking about that, without giving a history lesson on the BMF that I think we are all aware of, there's something there's a milestone in our history that sort of speaks to me quite a bit. So we read that in 1986, there is actually a annual BMF report of 2012, was a black book that tells the story of how we transitioned from being an apolitical organization to being now what is described in our MOI as being not apolitical, yet being non-partisan. And the explanation given there is that the leadership of Dr. Don Kwanazi and Dr. Lodndlovu, the late, both late, was they asked the question of how do we continue being apolitical at a time of such heightened atrocities? Anyone who remembers our history will know that in '86, it was the state of emergency that was declared in 4 regions in the country. So basically, when we look at today and when we try to make sense of the future, for me, it seems unless we ask that question again in the wake of a pandemic and in the wake of state capture and corruption, you know, our thinking might be limited because it would be in between the parameters of who we are now. But the most important question would really be to say, in order to respond to the challenges that we see in our environment, in our country, are we still, you know, comprised in the correct manner? Are we the people that we're supposed to be? So perhaps we need an even bigger conversation around whether or not we are, you know, structured correctly to be able to respond to the challenges. I mean, when we look at the last mile of service delivery, which is local government, completely collapsed. And I think a different type of BMF is needed to be able to respond to that. So therefore, a member-centric organization, as I get to your question, Chairman, is that, you know, when if you were in the 2018 AGM of the BMF, you might remember that there was a bit of a aggrieved and wanted to raise an issue because he was cited in the book of another president and almost accused of having wanted to make us an ANC desk during his era. The era after that, in conversations that I have, that you may have heard of as well in the BMF, the sum total of what people would say that era was about was corporatizing the BMF. I don't know if you've heard that sort of thing in conversation, where we needed to be more corporate than that. And the era after that, as I recall it, was one that spoke a lot and responded to all issues. JSE, we even had, I think we made some great work there with some listing requirements that were achieved through the work. So that was the focus. This presidency, I'm sure sometime in the future when it's done, we'll reflect on it as well in terms of what its focus was. So when I talk of a member-centric BMF, I'm talking about a BMF that focuses on its most important stakeholder, its number one stakeholder, that is the member. I do think that our focus tends to be every other stakeholder, whether it be government, whether it be the JSE, whether it be corporate SA, but just not an obsession and fixation about the member, about how we reach out to them, you know, what marketers would call customer touch points, you know, where we interact with them, whether it's on social media, whether it's on the internet. So a lot of what we do neglects the member, in my view. And the evidence of that is our declining membership. If you look over the past 3 years, you would see that our membership has not grown like it was envisioned. And some of those issues are not really rocket science or strategic issues. It's really where the rubber hits the road, as they say, on execution. So we could do a little bit better there, but we need to have a clear focus in driving all issues that advance the interests of the member, as opposed to a fixation on this or the other stakeholder. Let me pause there. Program Director.
Thank you, Zizi. Esetu, would you then agree that what's next for the BMF? Would you agree with Uzizi that it is a BMF that is obsessed with the member, a member-centric organization? Does that fit in with your vision of the BMF beyond 2021? If not, what is that vision, and are we fit for purpose to achieve it? What structural changes do you think we need, if you think there are some structural changes that are required, as we've heard from Uzizi a moment ago?
Thanks, Kuma. I do agree with Uzizi in terms of our lack of member centricity, just as an organization. And I think I come from the vantage point of having joined the BMF. I remember when I was at Nedbank in the years 2011 to 2015, I was a member. I was not in any leadership structure, but I joined and I keenly followed the activities of the BMF, and I then fell off the BMF. And I rejoined when I was co-opted onto the board in is it 2018 or early 2019. So I think I've served 3 years on the board now. And I think having almost left and come back, rather, as opposed to people who've been in the organization for a long time, who have a very, probably internal view, I'm able to say that from my perspective, and now obviously I'm an insider, but before I became that, I felt that the BMF was very internally focused. And in fact, the BMF benefits people who are already members. So yes, we've got programs, etc., but those are really available and also marketed to people who are already members. And you find that a lot of people outside of the organization don't know about these programs. So we keep wondering, how is it that we get people to know about our programs and we have enough of a pull and a value, because we do have a value proposition. Zizi spoke about the marketing aspect. And it's really about how we communicate that value proposition. I mean, we've got, so I have this vision where the BMF takes you from student chapter to the C-suite, right? And at each of those stages of your career, so as you leave varsity, you enter the workplace. There we've got YPDP. When you're in middle management, I know that we've got a program with Duke now called MLAP, which is I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's a management leadership advancement program, and it's targeted mainly at your middle management. And then as you go up the ranks, you've got your Women in Power, you've got your GIBS, MBAs, and I'd like us to introduce things like management development programs and executive development programs so that we track the progress of our leaders and we offer them different programs based on the stage of their career. And it would be awesome to have a member who said, from student chapter, I then entered the workplace. The BMF gave me tools when I entered the workplace of how to survive in the workplace, because corporate SA is still a jungle. And corporate cultures and microaggressions still affect Black people very, very much so. And at that level, when people leave varsity and they enter that workplace as a Black person, where in varsity and high school, let's be realistic, you're still very buddy-buddy with your white friends and everything is still nice. But when you enter the workplace, for me personally, that was the first time I realized that actually, girl, you are Black and you are going to have different struggles to... Come on.
Hi, is it?
I'm sorry, somebody phoned. I'm on my phone because my computer disappointed me in terms of network. As I was saying, so when you enter that workplace, a BMF member ought not to be surprised that when you enter corporate SA, there are all of these cultural issues. I know Oprah Lot speaks a lot about cultural transformation in SA, and that's still an issue today, as it was in the times of Oprah Lot. So that member should enter with the tools for entering a corporate South Africa. And then as they go up the ranks, again, I always say, being book smart is not enough in corporate SA. In corporate SA and even in public sector, there's so many strategies that you need to employ for the development of your career. And that's why, and I don't know if the rest of the members have experienced this, but the smartest person in your varsity class or in your matric class is not necessarily the person whose career skyrockets, because there's such a different set of strategies that is needed to manage your progression in the workplace. There's perception management, there's networking within the workplace, there's finding a sponsor within the workplace, somebody to guide you and assist you. There's so many issues that I experience, and I've been 11 years post articles as a CA. I have experienced recently issues with my boss, etc. And you need somebody to help you with those strategies. So I think the one thing for me is for us to be able to take our member right through. We don't drop them along the way. So that's the one thing. But you ask about a strategy or a vision for the next 3 years. So I think of three main things, Kuma, and I don't want to be too long. I want to be quite concise. The first thing is I want the BMF to be synonymous with the defending of BEE and employment equity legislation. So we're very proud about the fact that we gave birth to this. We are the midwives. In the conference in Stellenbosch of 1997, there was a resolution passed to establish the BEE Commission. It was then established in 1998. The employment equity legislation came in 98. And then later on through the BEE Commission, the BEE codes in 2007, etc. So we own that quite a bit. But what we don't own is to be the defenders. So that work is done. And it speaks to a saying that I like, and Zizi also quotes it, to say, each generation must out of relative obscurity discover their own mission and then either fulfill it or betray it. So if we look at employment equity legislation and BEE, as I was saying, we like to claim being the midwives of it or having birthed it, but are we defending it? And we are not. We see AfriForum and Solidarity go and challenge aspects of this legislation in court every day, to an extent that I personally fear that one day we will wake up and they will have undone all of our hard work. And what I've noticed about the recent judgments is that it is the legislation that dictates certain practices, or differently put, why we have lost certain cases is because the judge and the law says to you, but this is the legislation. So for example, recently, the two cases, the tourism case where they were trying to use BEE as a mechanism for giving assistance for COVID, that was lost, and so was the mining charter case. And when you look in depth at the mining charter case, you see that the judge simply said, but this is what the legislation says. The legislation says that the minister does not have legislative powers. So the mining charter does not supersede the act. The act says X, and the minister doesn't have powers to supersede the act. And so then AfriForum wins, and we wonder why. But what we have, Tuma, and I don't want to get too technical, minorities like your AfriForum, they use courts and law to advance their interests. We have a majority in parliament, but we are so terrible at going through those parliamentary processes and amending legislation to speak to what we want to achieve. So we run to court and we lose because the judge says, this is what the legislation says. If you want to change the legislation, you need to undergo a parliamentary process. So I would love for the litigation fund to start to analyze, let's not go to court because we're going to lose, because this is what the legislation says, and that's what the judge is going to stick to, regardless of whether the judge believes in transformation or not. So if we could have a litigation fund, and this is one of we should be proud as this leadership that's ending soon, to say the litigation fund was launched. We know what it's supposed to achieve. We just need to get the work done. So that's the first thing, and I think it's very important because I personally really weep every time AfriForum and Solidarity go to court and challenge BEE legislation and practices by ministers who are trying to effect BEE, but the legislation doesn't let them. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is, and this may be an audacious goal, but I think I feel passionate about it. Number two is that Black managers don't belong to unions. So because of your level, you don't actually, so I work for a bank, but I don't belong to the banking union at all because of my leadership level. So when I face issues in the workplace, which I have at my level, I have recently faced serious issues with my boss and all sorts of things, I have nowhere to go to, okay? I can share a personal story where there was a manager who was treating me really badly, and I had a good relationship with the CEO, and he said to me, lodge a grievance against her. And I said to the CEO, I'm not going to lodge a grievance against her because I don't trust the system to protect me. So Black managers, whether it's whistleblowers, we saw a lot of whistleblowers from the state capture era. Black managers are just being hung out to dry. They don't have a safe space. And I'm not saying I have the exact answer. I'm not saying BMF should be a union, but I'm saying BMF should find a mechanism to be a safe space. We have power in numbers so that Black managers don't feel like they're alone in these corporates. And I have personally felt that just recently. So that's the second thing. Whatever the structure, the mechanism is, if you have a labor law issue, if you have a question about how you're being treated, if you want advice, we should be one of the first organizations that come to the mind of a Black manager to say, yes, you may not go and represent me in labor court, but guess what? You're going to advise me, you're going to support me, you're going to assist me, you're going to share with me your own experiences, and I am not going to feel so alone. And the third thing, Kuma, for me, is around doing a deep dive into the structure of corporate SA. Now, I like the reference to the Basotho hat model because that actually gives us a mechanism to measure how transformation is happening in corporate SA. And the triangle obviously represents that where a lot of Black people are here and very few Black people are at the top of the triangle. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we're not using it to, we wait for the employment equity report every year, then we're very reactive about going on TV and shouting and screaming. But why are we not saying, we've done our own analysis? And this is what we found. Financial services sector, why is it that every time a Black CEO leaves, if you look at Daniel Minele, if you look at Basani Maluleke, if you look at the previous CFO of Nedbank, yes, she didn't leave under a cloud, but my point is that whenever a Black executive exits, her name is Raisile, she was the CFO at Nedbank, and when she exits, then a white Afrikaans takes over. At ABSA, a white Afrikaans takes over. Obviously at African Bank, it's Black, but it's a Black male. And that is still reversing the gains of transformation. And for me, personally, it's as if white people say to us, we gave you your one chance at having a Black CEO. Look, it hasn't worked out. We're going back to what we know. And we just accept those things. We should be doing our own analysis and saying, we have looked at who is in your executive now. We've also looked at who's your next level. We don't see Black people. We don't see Black females. Financial services sector, insurance companies, telecoms, whichever sector we deem to be strategic. And in order, Kuma, you mentioned being a mile wide and 5 meters deep. I forgot the saying. But in order to do that effectively, I would suggest we choose specific sectors and we do our own deep dives into those sectors so that we can take these industries on as the BMF, not waiting for the employment equity report every year, and say to them, yes, you may have X, Y, and Z in your leadership now, but what's your succession plan? Because we don't see at middle management enough Black people. What are you doing to develop them, etc. So I think, Kuma, in summary, those would be my three main priorities. And the one I am absolutely most passionate about is this undoing of BEE and employment equity in the courts and the processes which we need to follow. I think we've forgotten, we say we want to be influence policy, we say we want to be, we want advocacy, but I think we don't quite understand what it takes. And we've forgotten the processes of speaking to portfolio committees, of speaking to NEDLAC, of speaking to ministers, of speaking to business, labor, and actually advocating for what we stand for.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Asetu. You raise a critical point here, and I want to get in sort of a relatively insider outsider view on this on this next issue. And I'm going to ask Nicholas and DP to weigh in on here. Of course, it's not necessarily insider. We're all insiders on this panel to a large extent. I want to know, where are we on the conversation around BE and employment equity as it stands in the country now, in light of what Asetu has raised, that there are numerous challenges. Where are we and where should we be? And the second issue, now I'm going to start with you, Nicholas, and then go to DP to round us off. And I want to leverage, Nicholas, your experience in being on the operational side of the organization in this effect, because I think we agree on being member focused. How well do we know our members, right? And how do we get to know them a little bit better so that we can respond to them? So those two things in about 2 minutes or less. Where are we in the conversation in defense of BE and employment equity? Where should we be? And how well do we know our members? And what should we do to get to know them a little bit better?
So let's start in terms of where are we? I think we have abandoned what was started by those who were within BMF, we have certainly have abandoned that. And if anyone has got doubts, if we have, then you should realize how many of the cases have we pursued, particularly when it comes to employment equity as well as BE, as earlier articulated by some of the panel members here, because we haven't done that. Yes, we have congratulated a number of people, but you see, what has been missing is very good in terms of developing that thought leadership and advocacy. We have somehow haven't done much on this issue. We haven't really decided to go and find good partners, and that's what we should be doing. Find good partners that will help us so that we can be this very good professional organization that really does good research, so that we can demonstrate when we talk about the regression, it's not going to be some numbers that somebody heard, unreliable, thumbsucked everywhere, and this number gets bandied around. We need to do our own research and be able to tell the story. If we believe we gave birth to the employment equity, as we did, as well as to BE, then we need to make sure that we keep our hands in the pie, in the pulse, and doing so, Kuma, is unfortunately will get us to be rewired differently, other than just using platforms and shout and say, hey, this should not have happened. We've got to really bring all the good ones, all the expertise that we have amongst ourselves as I move on to that value proposition at BMF. I'm sure you talk to a marketer. So in terms of value propositions, many people benefited from the value proposition that BMF had. There was no value proposition other than networking within BMF for many years. It was just networking, and you'll probably have a guest speaker at one of the events who will share certain things, and that was about it. And for many people, if you listen to the likes of Ubabu Eric Mafuna, they'll tell you the reason why he slightly broke away from BMF then, because he wanted to create a learning institution. That's why he decided to set up his academy. He wanted to create a learning institution, and others felt that, do you need brick and mortar? So I guess there's a middle ground in terms of that value proposition. We've got to go back and recreate a very, very strong. It was there. You remember we had the Harvard, we had a number of lifestyle programs, we had a lot of trainings when it was with the IOD, we had trainings that we used to partner with the KPMG and many other audit firms to help our members even understand the New Companies Act, which when it came, I think around about 2012, so to speak. So I guess we need to maybe go back to that value proposition, because that's what our members are asking of us in this organization. Maybe just the last thing, Kuma, that I think we do talk around it as I hand over to the next member is, I guess sometimes we need this era that we are moving in, as you call BMF Beyond 2021, we need to do an introspection of the organization. We must focus on ourselves. Let's look at ourselves in the mirrors. The emperor has got no clothes. Sooner than later, the outside is going to start piercing and looking at us and look at our character, and they will be very disappointed when they see the numbers. They'll be very disappointed when they see that we are unable to even deal with issues of succession planning. They'll be very disappointed to see that we are still dilly-dallying on issues of gender parity in terms of women leadership. These are the dangers that I think it's important for us to somehow, we need to maybe for a short time and just say, look, let's look internally. Let's start realigning our organization and find out what can we do to make sure that when somebody starts piercing, at least we are not going to be embarrassed when people discover that the only thing that has really been carrying us has been that very good BMF brand, and has been the fact of the work that was done by our forebears in terms of the BE, in terms of our employment equity. The question is, what have we done as this new generation? And that's what we should focus on going forward. Thanks, Tuma.
Thank you, Nicholas. DP, where are we in the conversation? And how well do we know our members?
So let me speak to the issue of, where we are as a nation. It's actually quite sad because we've got a, as non-partisan as we say we are, we have an ANC ruling party. Okay, that's a fact. The ruling party, our government, who we vote for repeatedly, are the ones who are in power. They are the ones who can affect that vote in parliament. It's not a secret. So when we talk about accountability in the larger context, we need to hold our leaders accountable. Lily spoke beautifully about culture, and I think culture is very much linked to action and behavior, because that's how you determine culture, through your action and your behavior, both inside the boardroom and outside. And to say that culture can be designed, even though it develops over time, you can be deliberate about the kind of culture you want. It can be designed, and obviously what Nick spoke to, it can evolve. Now, for me, the issue of litigation, I agree with the points made by Isetu in terms of AfriForum going to court, and these are, again, not minority in the sense of demographically, but this is still the economic majority in the country, which is why they can go to court easily. I'm a lawyer. I mean, if you want to take a matter from High Court to the Con Court, it's millions of rands. It's not a joke. You're not going to go there with one counsel. You're going to have senior and junior counsel. We've seen these things, how it unfolds in the country. And you want the very best. If the other side's got Wimtren Grove, you're going to want Gaitobi. I mean, he's not going to be cheap either, right? So the issue of the litigation fund is very important, but I think, we need to delink it from the NPC. So AfriForum will have an organization that's another NPC, so that if they do lose, we're not going to carry that. There's going to be no assets to attach. I mean, we've got a building in Rivonia, Eric Mafuna House. So we don't want to be litigating and then we lose, rightly or wrongly, because litigation is a roll of the dice, and then we get all our assets attached. So, but more important than litigating is exactly what Nicholas said. Where is our research capacity? Where is the direction I'm so worried about issues that are happening in the national space, bills that have already been submitted that we haven't made input on. And once those bills are passed as legislation, it's too late now. It's going to take another 3 years to effect the kind of change that you want to see. And the courts are interpreting the law as it is stated. And I think collaboration came very strongly through from Nicholas in terms of, if we say that we have an ANC ruling party and we have close links to, I mean, if the president of the country can come to our events, why do we not have his ear? Seriously, why don't we have his ear on legitimate matters? Why are we, why are these things being placed at BUSA and BBC and wherever else but BMF? We cannot be making pronouncements on wrong CEOs after they've been appointed. We should have known that they were looking for a CEO before they made the appointment. Not to say that we are an organization looking for jobs for people. We're not a union. We're not here to give people jobs. But if corporate South Africa values us, then they should be consultative with us. It should be reciprocal. We get something out and they equally get something out. So there's that reciprocation in terms also of the type of member. I mean, the member is there to say, for 757, what do I get? And then we as an organization, we need to say, well, because you're getting X or Y or Z, a YPDP program, Women in Power, access to whatever events we have and workshops and seminars. What is it that you are going to do in your space for the BMF? And not just rely on the fact that we're just going to sit back as BMF and wait as a BMF member, and the BMF must produce this Black excellence in us. We're not born BMF managers. through your exposure to BMF, you become a BMF manager. It's exactly what Isetu says in the workplace. You realize as a Black person, you must either assimilate and be seen as a white person, but know that you are Black, but then be treated differently because you're not Black. So you pretend to be white, but then you realize that even that is not good enough and it's not advancing you. So I think there are many issues. For me, policy and research, resuscitating that at a national level, resourcing it, very, very important. I just want to make a point that I've made previously. It's not something that I've never said before. Member centricity, what Uzizi was talking about. Are we obsessed with the member? Okay. How do we translate that obsession of the member then at a national level? And when we say BMF members are our shareholder, so shareholders are not always guaranteed dividends, as you know. The company takes a knock, it means the shareholder's not going to get a dividend. But what I do think as BMF shareholders, especially because we have an investment company called BMFI, that we are deliberate about how that funding gets used towards the advancement of members. We have a Lot and Lovo Legacy Trust through which we run the, Motsepe Foundation, we run the bursaries through the Lot and Lovo Legacy Trust, okay? But as BMF leadership, who set the tone for the culture of the organization, and I'm speaking to provincial chairs, co-opted directors, mancos, etc. Have we ever produced in the 45 years a BMF graduate? Have we? For all the millions of dividends that we have received from BMFI, do we have a single person that has graduated? One person. And what are we then doing to contribute? Like Isetu says, you know, you're a student chapter, you migrate into, you start your work, you become a young professional. And from there, how does that development happen within the BMF, and what are the support systems? And if you are a board member or a provincial executive committee member or a MANCO member and you don't have a mentee in the BMF, then you must ask yourself, why not? And find that mentee. Don't say, well, if the mentee doesn't come to me, you find the mentee, because that is your contribution toward fulfilling. Because remember, we're not only here as leadership, we're also BMF members. And being, as long as we have all been in this organization, there's no one who better understands. And the more you're in it, it's what Malcolm Gladwell speaks about. 10,000 hours, you become an expert. So we must never discount the fact that we've been serving this organization selflessly without any remuneration or expectation of remuneration or expectation of getting a position. If anything, we need to go back to basics and say, you know, what can we give members? And I remember serving with the same people who got stalwarts jackets. I remember sitting as MANCO and going through membership application forms. So it then leads to our second question: how do we get to know the BMF members? How do we get to know them firstly, and then how do we get to know them better? So we've got a database of more than the amount of people that we have in good standing. And a lot of those people will say, well, you know, BMF didn't call me, I don't mind joining again, but send me a form or do that. So we need that kind of resource, that not as people who don't do BMF full-time, we need to ensure that we attract, because there are people that are very successful too, that were members, and for some or other reasons they don't want to be members. It's just that nobody's asked them to renew their membership thing. So and I think they don't have a hard sell in terms of saying, come back to BMF. I see my internet connection's not good.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, you know, in terms of how do we get to know our BMF members, you know, we also need to say, how do we get to know each other? What network? So we can't be sitting in board meetings talking about reading reports. Each of us, we in whatever space we occupy, we have social capital, we've got strong social networks. What can we bring to the table? We're friends with CEOs at various companies. How do we draw them into the BMF? How do we collaborate? I mean, we had a transformation barometer. That was our idea. And I mean, I see Sanlam launching, these transformation barometers, and I'm thinking, but guys, we did this like 5 years ago. Other organizations launching gender transformation barometers, and I'm saying, but as BMF, we probably are the most organized Black organization at the moment. Why are we not harnessing that power, that brand value, more deliberately, more mindfully, more consciously?
All right. No, thank you, DP, and thank you for that. And in drawing towards a close, I'm going to come to you, Lily. Now is easy with my next question. It seems as though we've got quite of a handle as to what it is we need to focus on beyond 2021, where the issues lie. And Uzizi mentioned something about you can't fully appreciate where you're going unless you know where you came from. And so I've got a double barrel question for the two of you. And I'll start with you, Lily, and then come to you, Moses. Is what in the last 45 years have we learned that we can use to achieve some of the things that we are talking about here today in beyond 2021? And the second question will be, and I'm taking this from a question that was posed by one of our attendees in this webinar, and to say, if you were elected president tomorrow, what would be your 3 top priorities? Wesetu has shared hers with us. What would be your three priorities? So that's the double barrel question for you, Lily. Now is what have you learned in the last 45 years that can help us address some of the things that we've spoken about here today? And second of all, in addressing those things, what would be your top 3 priorities if you were the BMF president tomorrow?
Okay, I think the last 45 years, the BMF itself has went through a lot of transition and a lot of transformation. But there's definitely one thing that we have learned that still sticks with us even now is the continuing effects of what apartheid has done to us as Black people, not only in the businesses, but also if you're looking at the government entities. And if you're looking at what we are going through now in the different cases that my fellow colleagues are talking about, that we still have a lot of work that we need to do. So it goes back to, is the BMF then still relevant? Definitely, because as long as we can still feel those effects of apartheid within the business, within the communities, within the government entities, which means that we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we change the socioeconomic transformation of this country. So we must just keep continuing, we must just keep holding on as the BMF. We must never get to a point where we say that we have reached a point where the BMF is no longer relevant. This country definitely still needs us. We still have a lot that we can contribute to this country. And then the other thing that we've also learned is, as much as Triple B is there and the government is working so hard to make sure that it is successful and it is working, there is very much poor monitoring and evaluation on this aspect. And as much as we are the ones that introduce this, we are also responsible to make sure that we become part of helping government to make sure that this is monitored, this is evaluated. We cannot get to a point where we're still arguing whether Triple BEE is relevant or not, while we know as the BMF that it is completely relevant, and we have not yet reached the point where we can say it's definitely no longer needed. And then I think the third thing that is also important is looking at our resource development. We're speaking about this membership-driven organization where we are so obsessed about membership, but are we really transforming this member to a point where we want them to be? Are we developing managers that can go out there and can fight for Triple BEE, can fight for transformation in the workplace? And I'm glad that Tasneem has also mentioned it, that once we get these members become part of BMF, they get these positions, they get into boards. Why are they walking away from the BMF? Why, when they walk into that board, we no longer see this transformation? We no longer see them become BMF type manager. What happened to that BMF DNA? Are you only having that DNA when you are part of the BMF? When you are active, when you are a board member, or when you are part of the leadership within the BMF? The minute you get out there on a day-to-day basis, then it no longer speaks to you. So how do we completely transform the minds of the leaders to say that transformation does not only begin because you are a member of BMF, because you are paying your membership and you are visible in all the AGMs and everything? When you go into your working space, when you go into the sector where you are going to serve, you need to practice, you need to speak transformation. So this then leads me to the top 3 things that I think is important. I think, firstly, the leadership of BMF beyond 2021 must focus on human capacity development. Yes, we've got fantastic programs that we're talking about, but are we tracking this progress of this member? Tomorrow, when the president sits down and says to us, we need you to give us a chairperson for the SAA board, can we look inside and can we say, looking at Lily and Lily's journey within the BMF, Lily has done the following programs, Lily has got the following values, Lily holds the values and the culture of a BMF type manager. Hence, we can put Lily forward to say she can become the chair of that SAA board. Are we at that position yet? No. So we need to have a system where we can be able to track this human capacity development, as much as we are giving people courses, as much as we are giving them programs. And I'm so glad that even now, most of our programs are NQA NF aligned. But the problem is, are we tracking this? Can anybody walk into BMF now and say, I need 7 directors from your organization, and we'll be able to go to branch level, to province level, go back to the board and say, here's the list of members that we are proud of, and we know that they will definitely carry the transformation agenda. And then the second thing, I think what is also important that the leadership should definitely focus, it's a value system. We are seeing now what is happening in the country, not only within BMF as well, that our value system as Black people is deteriorating. We are seeing a lot of unethical behavior that is going on. We are feeling that every time we have a Black person who has a leadership position or is holding a specific power, within a couple of months, they will be rooted out for corruption. There will be something that comes out of it. And as the BMF, then we go back and we say we are disappointed and we hand out or we issue these media statements. But what are we doing within our members to make sure that we are building that culture, we are emphasizing that Ubuntu, that equity, that ethics, from membership level all the way till the presidency? We should have some kind of ethics charter. We should have some kind of value system that we are building within our members. And this value system must be something tangible. We cannot just be saying that we are proud that one of our members has been appointed into a specific position. 3-4 years down the line, they are making headlines for corruption and all kinds of things. So we should definitely have a system where that is being able to be tracked down, and we should be able to instill that culture within the BMF system. And then most importantly, I think I spoke about how we can be part of this monitoring and evaluation of the BBBEE. I mean, there's no way that we can leave that behind. So those are the 3 things that definitely the leadership of BMF should definitely look at. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you, Lily. Zizi, what have we learned? And what can we use from what we have learned for the next 45 years to achieve what we're talking about here? And what are your top 3 priorities?
Thank you, Makama. I'll just save the video, man. It's not good at all. But what have we learned in the last 45 years? So for me, it's simple. It goes back to that earlier comment that I made. We can be whosoever that we say we are. That milestone of 1986, when we decided who we needed to be in the face of the environment of the day, is the most important lesson for me, because then it stretches our thinking outside of the parameters that we have. There are people now who would have us think and believe that all we should be doing is reciting employment equity stats and triple BE. There are people who still ask us within this BMF why we have an SMME fund, why we have an SMME program, because of what the BMF in its founding was. So we have to continue thinking about what it is that we need to be in response to the conditions of the day. Now, to really give effect to that, tell you a story. Having exited the BMF board 15 days ago, a couple of months ago, ANC veteran, Mr. J. Naidu, is in conversation with the BMF board and says a very important thing that really sat with me. He says, well, with all of what you're saying, he's not interested in propping up a dead horse. You all know which horse that is. But when he looks around and as he speaks to some of the veterans in the ANC, they see no organization that has got the legitimacy and the credibility like a BMF to be able to respond to some of the issues that are happening in the country. And this goes beyond.
Zizi, I think we've lost you there for a second. Perhaps this
local government is what it is today. What is it that we are going to do instead of being who we have been for the last 36 years? This is now from being not apolitical. But on to the three things that I would do. And when you ask that question, Dube, you must say not if, when. But the three things for me, as stated in a document that you may have seen, the two are done, by the way. They just need to be implemented. So the first thing I can say is that there are no new ideas here. You would have heard Nick tell you of the SMME. I've spoken to other leaders in the BMF that spoke about the professional registration. So there are no new ideas here in the BMF. The real problem we have is execution. The things are not done. We do resolve on these things, but they're just not done. And of course, you would know President Mohale always reminds us of General Patton, who says something to the effect that an immaculate execution will save even a mediocre plan. All we need to do is execute as the BMF. So the first is the professional registration. We'll tell the story even in the AGM. This, by the way, is not my claim to a program. It is something that I was a part of with members of this board, with members of my province, and also with members of Gauteng, some of them that collaborated, Mr. Solomon Moripa to be specific. This is a program now that's going to see the light of day. In a few weeks, I'm sure we will be announcing as the committee what it is that the program is going to be doing, and we'll be taking members through the designation process of the BMF. It's done. The SMME Fund, a 2018 resolution sponsored by the Eastern Cape, adopted by National, is also done. We have now what is known as the Intsiga Impact Fund. The chairman of that fund is going to be speaking to members, I'm sure, in a couple of weeks. This is the work that we have done in the BMF. The last one is the digitization of the forum. A couple of speakers spoke about it. We are losing incredibly, in terms of membership, in terms of growth of our organization because of the way in which we are now. So in the BMF in 2019, 2018, 2019, 2020, those 3 years, 2018, we must have foregone something around 700,000 rands, 524 the following year, and 503, I think, the year after, in membership fees. These are people that attempt to become members by filling in forms online, but because that process is so tedious, so onerous, they end up abandoning it. When we calculate those figures, that is what we are losing. Those are simple things that we can fix if we've got the right tools, if we've got the right execution. So for me, Makama, these are not programs that need to be thought up. These are not programs that need to be imagined. These are programs that are happening now that just need monitoring, and they would be delivered to members. Thank you.
No, thank you, Zizi, for that. And I said, I'm going to ask you my last question before I hand over to the chairperson of the province. Colleagues, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. I've got about two to 3 minutes. If you're still thinking of a question, to drop it in there. The two that were in there, we've tried to weave them in the conversation as we went along to save on some time. I said, all of these leaders have said some pretty great things about what needs to be done, what we have learned, including yourself. You've shared to us what are your three priorities for the BMF beyond 2021. I guess what I want to perhaps get a sense of from you is on what Uzizi has just said, is that these are not new, we're just not executing. How do we become more accountable in the BMF for the things that we say we want to do? Regardless of the outcomes of whatever race that we're in, as members, as individuals who say they are BMF members who were committed to this cause, how do we hold each other more accountable in the small spaces that we occupy, even if that space isn't office?
Oh, thanks, Kuma. I've got so much going through my mind and I don't want to be all over the place. In terms of, I think as individual members, so for example, we have a board of directors of the BMF, and it's very difficult for us to sit here. Yes, you are self-critical, but then while you're actually being self-critical, you're also saying to yourself, ish, but I've been part of this board for 3 years, so what am I actually saying? You know, who was supposed to execute on these things? So I've got that bit of a conflict in this self-criticism to say, but we've been at the helm for 3 years, so who else was supposed to make these things happen? So that I think is an admission on our part. I think how we hold each other. So for example, we lament that our board subcommittees are not working, but how many on? What have we done to make sure that those that are not working are revived? So those are the things that we need to ask. Also provincial at branch level. We are the only ones who can hold each other accountable, or else members will start holding us accountable, and that public, that Nicola Council, we need to be very proactive in terms of holding each other accountable. I think that's the first thing that I would say. Around the execution or the lack of execution, I think I would agree with those. And I think as I was thinking through this, we need to look at the BMF office as a corporate. In fact, the BMF structures need to be more corporatized. And I say this because there's a reason why high performance cultures or high performance organizations work that way. And in summary, Kuma, the strategy, the vision, the mission of the organization needs to be distilled into KPIs. And those KPIs are for the managing director of the organization, who then distills them down to his operations staff in the office. And the MD also is responsible for structuring. And I know because we've hired MDs and we've given them the latitude to structure the office, the organization. And when I say the organization, I'm specifically referring to the BMF office, because that is a corporate and that is an organization, start seeing it as such. So we've given the MD latitude to structure that organization which he leads in the way in which he sees fit in order to deliver on the strategic priorities. So corporates all over the world adopt this sort of accountability mechanism where the strategy gets distilled into strategic initiatives, which get distilled into KPIs so that we can hold people accountable. And this is at board level, and it is also in the executive, in the office. And there's almost no other way to do it, Kuma. This is how it works. So we mustn't shy away from those things. And I think and this is an admission from this board, the absence of that executive capability in the office shows up in many different ways in the organization. So we need a very strong MD, we need strong, whether it's an operations manager, and we have the latitude to structure that organization the way that we see fit. But the way that accountability is going to happen, so for example, if you're a provincial chair and we have a membership target of 10,000, we should have started in 2018 to say, okay, let's look at each province. Obviously we're not going to slice 10,000 divided by 9 because provinces have different dynamics, provinces have different membership dynamics, but each province could actually set their own membership targets, which as the board, we ought to have monitored along the way. And that's how you ensure accountability, Kuma. I just want to speak to this thing, Gazizi, about the membership system. So I don't know if people have heard, but I have my own membership system where people who see me on social media, whatever it is, and who ask me, how do I join the BMF? I've got the BMF membership forms on my WhatsApp, so on my phone. And I send it to them and I say, send it back to me, filled in with the proof of payment. I then send it to Tuli at the office in full, and I sit on them until that member is registered. It's not ideal, but rather than have people say, I've sat on the website, I've tried to fill out the form. In the meantime, I've got my own unique membership system. And that also brings me to the last point, Kuma, without being too long, is to say, I think, I look at social media and I've just gone over the youth mark, but I'm still very much a social media person because now we live on our phones. So the one thing I would say is we do need a BMF app, like as of yesterday, because I don't really want to log into my computer to access anything from the BMF. I want it on my phone. I want an app. I want notifications to come up on my app. I want a reminder of a webinar to come up on my app. I want a reminder to renew my membership to come up on my screen. You allow notifications, it comes up on your screen, and I do it. I can go in on my phone and do it immediately. We are in that generation of technology and quick. Everything is quick. Everything is quick. So if it takes me more than 10 minutes, I'm no longer interested. So we need that BMF app. But what we also need to do, Toma, if you look at the social media generation, which is this generation we are now, we've got something called influencers. And I think Zizi spoke about marketing. I don't know if Zizi is a marketer or has some background in marketing, but I don't. But I do know that I'm the consumer. And I look at influencers. I've bought a shitload of things because somebody was wearing it on Instagram or on Twitter, whatever it is. And we need to infiltrate that, but become corporate influencers. So young kids now look up to celebrities and look up to musicians, which is fine. But they also need to see on the phone that here is a Kuma Dube who joined the BMF, who's a member of BMF, and as a result of that is now the chairperson of Insika Impact Fund. What does Insika Impact Fund do? Here is an essay to Mangojwa, a girl from Mthatha. Someone can relate to that and say, I'm from Mthatha, I'm from Kutsolo, but now she's the CFO of Grinica. And I want to shout it on the rooftops that is as a result of the BMF. So we must become BMF influencers. We must become corporate and SMME influencers. Those people who we wish to attract, we need to shout from the rooftops. I am not ashamed. You're amazed to the number of people who see me post on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Twitter, who want to join the BMF because they can see just in these three and a half years, personal exposure to programs, career development, whatever it is. I shout it from the rooftops. And we need to do that. And I say that, Toma, because somehow, Osisnolita, Obonang Mohale, Bekisibia, or Wiseman Goshu, they are synonymous with the BMF. And they did that in an era where there wasn't even social media. So you think Bonang, you think BMF. Sisnolita becomes the chairperson of the Minerals Council, first woman after 130 years. You think BMF. Bonang Mohale becomes chairperson of or president of WUSA. You think BMF. So we need to start to be synonymous with the BMF and become our own sort of advertisers and ambassadors of the BMF. And I think that speaks to also how we attract people into the BMF, people who are CAs, who are young CAs, who are females, who are lawyers like yourselves, who are marketers, who are involved in music. I know Nick chairs Samro. I don't know if you still do, Nick. But that's what we need to do, guys. And that's part of, I'm not saying it's all of building a membership base and building a value proposition and an attraction to the BMF, but it certainly works. I know I grew up looking at Osisnolita, no Bonang, Mohale, no Bikisvia, no Bani, and thinking, wow, you know, this is what I aspire to. And when you get that link that actually these people represent BMF, and when you think of them, you can't separate them from the BMF, then that for me attracts me and keeps me committed to the BMF, and I want to be that for other people. So I think in short, those would be some closing comments. I know we're still going to have questions, but yeah, I think those are the things that I think we need to do going forward.
No, thank you, Seti, for that comprehensive input. And yes, the questions all of a sudden have just started flooding in. But this is how I'd like to approach this, and by giving you each a moment with some parting shots to address some of the issues that have come out from the questions here. And Nicholas, you had your hand up, so we'll start with you and go in, and everybody has an opportunity for some parting shots to address some of the issues that have come out quite strongly in the chat. And the first is, with the BMF Beyond 2021, how does it position itself within civil society and its relationship with the politics of the nation, right? Do we want to become overly political, or do we want to continue playing the role of facilitator of choice of these conversations that really speak to? And I'm just trying to summarize what Upapama had put here as a question in the question and answer box. You're welcome to have a look there as well, if you feel as though you want to address it a little bit more impactfully. And the other issue is that in all of the issues that we have raised here, these are not new issues, and you are not new leaders within the organization. Is 2021 now the Damascus moment for our crop of leaders within the organization to become, to get a sense of wanting now to address these things with a little bit more intention? I want you to speak on that a little bit more as well. So those are the two things, and underpinning them is on how we change the culture of the organization. So we stop this thing of, and I see here somebody talked about the busing in of members at the time of the election. How do we shift some of those things? So in your closing remarks, I'd like you to touch on those things. One, where do we sit on the spectrum, or within civil society? Are we still the facilitator of choice? Should we get closer to the politics of the nation? And what influence would we possibly play in terms of how the ANC makes its decisions, or whatever party is in power for that matter? And the second question, of course, being, how do we change the culture of the nation? I want to give you each a minute and a half each to speak on those things, and then we'll hand over to the chair for her remarks before we close the program. Nick,
So thanks very much, Kumar. So quick one, as you know, I chair one of the largest civil organization in the country, which is Amnesty International South Africa, which is a human rights. So I certainly do believe within the BMF, one of the biggest thing that BMF is meant to do is to collaborate with stakeholders. Stakeholders, whether they are political stakeholders or whoever. And the reason why that's important, because that's how you're going to advance socioeconomic transformation. So that's a no-brainer. We have to get involved in this, and that's important for me. But I also maybe want to quickly deal with a couple of things that some of the panel members have dealt with here. And Esetu, don't be harsh to yourself as a current board member in terms of your admission, because BMF does provide an opportunity for people to learn. And the most important thing, people should learn from their mistake. Don't be that harsh to yourself and the other current board members. You know, Uzizi mentioned about the system. Kuma, the BMF system that was used is a system that I think we brought it in 2012. And after that, it worked so well, incorporated links to social media platforms, we recommended it to the Institute of Directors. I personally recommend the Institute of Directors. They're currently using it. You don't need a BMF app because that platform used to be automated. It could even do auto renewals for members, invoicing, and all of that. It was there. It's very seamless because it was member centric when we took this one. Ulilis mentioned about the character of the BMF members when we used to provide capable members to the various organizations when they're looking for board members. We used to do this. We used to provide a list because we knew we had people that were trained within the BMF that were ready to serve on boards. But this is not always about deployment on people to boards. People just need to be developed. But we were able to do this. I guess sometimes when we talk about these issues about accountability, where I think it was also mentioned that, have certain people account, people tend to be personal and they take personal offense when you're trying to correct, when you're trying to assist. And I guess within the BMF, there are a number of people, there's a lot of resource. We need to tap in within our strengths as we build one team, Kuma, as we build one vision for the BMF and going forward. And again, just to my parting shots on the character. Everything evolves around character. And even the culture. Character creates an organizational culture. Let's start with the character of our members within our organization. And that's maybe where I want to leave it off. And thanks very much for having us.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Lily, let me give you an opportunity for your parting shots.
All right. We definitely need to remain as the facilitator of choice. I wouldn't want us to have a very close relationship with the ruling party, because if you understand that we are here for, amongst most things, socioeconomic transformation, and we have to keep this leading party accountable. We have to keep them responsible to make sure that they transform the economy of this country. So we have to be very careful as much as we can have a healthy relationship with them, but it is very important that we need to keep them on their toes. They need to know that BMF is a force to be reckoned with. BMF will question all their actions that they do if they do not keep up to the promises. And, all of us here within the BMF, we are all Black people and we are all here affected by the decisions that are made by government. So when we go out there and we speak to the leading parties, not only from a BMF perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because most of the decisions that are being made are affecting us as individuals as well. And then most importantly, I saw on the discussion there was a question around having these people in office that are not ethical, and how are we contributing to the leading party to make sure that the leaders that they have. It's very, very important, and we've spoken about it so many times, that BMF should become the first choice when it comes to selection panel of ministers, selection panel of anybody within the government sector. Before they can be put in those positions, BMF should be part of that process where they are appointed. We are in the process now of appointing a new Chief of Justice, and BMF should be in the forefront to say, this is what we should be looking at and how we should be active as a society to make sure that whoever is chosen in those positions have got ethical leadership and they are going to do what they promise the people to do. We must also have a better relationship, of course, with other stakeholders, but it is very important that we must always be in the middle. We must always be the facilitator of choice. And then the last question around transformation, the culture that is happening within the BMF. When you are part of the BMF leadership, and most of the people that have been there from chairperson up to the board level, each and every single one from all the different presidency, they will tell you that the shape or the direction of the organization is directly influenced by the leadership. We've been speaking about the BMF through the different eras, the BMF in the 1970s, the BMF in the 1980s. the BMF now. It goes through different transitions. It goes through different leadership characters. So it's not only about an individual perspective to say that when you were a chairperson of a province at this particular time, you failed. How are you then going to become a president? Everything goes through the different phases. It goes through the different transitions. And what most importantly, the membership also, the needs and the role of the BMF within the organization changes. So most of us, when we were joining the BMF, when we were younger, maybe as young professional, a student chapter, your vision of the organization, and once you become active in the organization and you assume leadership role, everything completely changes. And we need to allow that, because that is what transformation is about. Transformation is about changing through the different circumstances and making sure that you change the way that you think and the way that you see things. So definitely, as we stand here, we definitely are changing the way that things are being seen. We are definitely changing the value proposition that we are giving to members. And most importantly, we are saying that BMF is a big organization. BMF has got a great future. What we definitely need is a leadership that will be there to carry it, to sustain it, to shape it, so that we can be where we need to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lily. Moses, your last words.
Thank you, Malcolm. Let me start by saying there's a question on the chat from A. Vuyoludidi that says, can Zizi give a bit more detail on the Intsiga Fund offering? So that it doesn't eat on my 90 seconds, Chair, may I ask that you take that question on my behalf? I just want to talk to two things, really. And start by saying the BMF must be true to who they say they are. The BMF in the Eastern Cape is 36 years old. Up until 15 days ago, it had only had one woman chairperson. We decided and we executed. Today, we have the second chairperson. The BMF must do what it says it is. We don't need amendments. We do what we're supposed to do. The second thing I want to say, and why my talk centers around membership, is because at the end of the day, it is the single most important stakeholder of this organization. So it's what's going to keep it standing. I mean, who still remembers that in the Northern Cape, we had the branches of Katu, Kuruman, Khatelopele, and Kimberley. But today, we only have Northern Cape. Who remembers that in KwaZulu-Natal, we had the Midlands, we had Pietermaritzburg, we had KwaMashu, we had Richards Bay, we had Durban, but now we have KZN, Free State. Same story. Eastern Cape, Graf Reinet, Bishop, East London, now only 3 branches. We have to focus on building our organization from within. That is the single most important thing I think this term of leadership should be focused on. Otherwise, as Nick pointed out earlier, I think part of the reason why we may not even be taken seriously, UDP mentioned that we've got the ear of the president and corporate, but why isn't there any movement? For me, the answer is simple. They've already looked beyond and seen that these numbers don't quite add up. We have to work on them. But lastly, so that members don't leave this meeting with a different impression of what we're actually saying, or rather the state of the organization. Most times when you're actually out of a committee or of a board or this or that organization, all of a sudden you see all of the wrong things and you suddenly have a voice. I wouldn't want to be in that sort of position. There's a lot of good that has been done by this leadership team, or rather this leadership term. But like I said earlier, we will reflect on it once they've completed their work. But for me, there is certainly a lot of value that has been added. Yes, there's been things that could be improved upon, which is the things that we highlight the most to say, how can we take it further? So the focus is on fixing the things that aren't going so well, instead of basking in our glory on things that we have done well. But believe me, there's been a lot of those. So that would sum up my contribution on the topic, Chair. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Zizi. Esetu, 90 seconds as well. Parting shots, and then DP, you'll have the final word.
Chair, I think I said a mouthful in my previous contribution, and I thought I was actually the first person to have my last 90 seconds. Perhaps let me just say, to echo what Zizi is saying, whilst we are self-introspective, perhaps self-critical, and doing a self-evaluation, I think we must acknowledge the work that has been done during this term and this board and this presidency led by Andile and DP Tasneem.
I think your connection is just
been really good strides. I mean, you look at the re-establishment of things. I mean, I know I was quite close to process where Kuma?
I said to your back.
Okay. No, I was saying, I think as much as we are self-critical, I think we need to acknowledge some of the strides that have been made during this term. I think having the President of the Republic at our CUD was absolutely phenomenal. I still get goosebumps and excited about it today. We have almost re-established that communication channel with the union buildings. And I think we just need to do more work in terms of targeting certain ministries, targeting certain industry bodies to work with. And the lawyers will know this better, but I believe that organizations have become what is called amicus or friends of the court in certain court cases. And in those cases, I'm not sure, I stand to be corrected, but I don't know if you get costs orders granted against you if I mean the side that you were supporting loses. But I think, you know, we now associate organizations like Freedom Under Law, KSAC, South African Institute of Race Relations, and the Helen Suzman Foundation. I'm sure everybody on this call knows those organizations because they have been friends of the court on many issues of whether it's constitutionality, whether it's wrong appointments that are happening. And I think we really need to strengthen that arm. I'm not in any way suggesting we put the organization at risk of liquidation, but we need to find a mechanism to strengthen that arm in terms of influencing policy and legislation. I think as well, the establishment of the litigation fund, I think is something we can pat ourselves on the back about. The SMME, the INSIGA fund, of which you are chair, of which myself and Zizi are a member, that is something that I am personally very proud of. And a lot of the programs that have been, that ran during this term. And I think I'd also like to commend the organization. During COVID, I think we adapted very well, and we had, you know, moving online and having so many relevant webinars and discussions during that time when people were really quite shocked and depressed and shell-shocked, and you know, COVID really was just a shock to all of us. But I think the organization was able to still reach out to its members in that time. So we ought to also celebrate and pat ourselves on the back for those wins. But I do think that there's a lot of work to do. As DP mentioned, 3 years sometimes is not enough to see a strategy through, particularly when there is COVID that comes and perhaps gets you off course. So I think that there's still work to be done. The vision, the mission of the BMF remains the same. We just need to adapt to the material conditions on the ground, whether it's change of political leadership, whether it's change of context, like things like COVID. We constantly adapt and innovate ourselves, but we stay true to the vision and mission of the BMF and the values of the BMF. So I'm personally very proud to be a member of the BMF. And thank you for having this webinar this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Esetu. DP, my leader, your parting shots in 90 seconds or less.
Yeah, Thank you so much to the members for tuning in and listening and for the time given on their Sunday. Yeah, I just want to say, you know, the fact that we did not have a MD definitely impeded the kind of progress we should have made and could have made. And, you know, I think that it would be wrong of me, and I was never going to do that in terms of blaming anyone. I think as a BMF, when we are portrayed, people don't speak about, but Tasneem did this and Lily did that and Kuma did that. They say the BMF did X, Y, Z. When people look at us, they say, well, you know, why has there not been a woman BMF president in the last 43 years? They don't say, why did Ntati Mafuna not ensure that there was a woman? You know, there's no personalities attached to the brand. And we need to really understand that this thing is really for our great-grandchildren. It's not about us. It is not for us. And so if we are going to expect to see the fruits of our labor during our lifetimes, then we really need to assess, is this the organization for us? Because then maybe we must employ our time, energy, and effort in building our careers. And I think that's what people do. They make personal choices. They don't want to be part of organizations that takes away from their personal growth and their family time. So for me, key to have an effective BMF, appoint an MD. In no organization, in no company does the board non-executive directors run companies. There's an executive director, and it's so bad that an executive director's action can hold non-executive directors liable if, you know, anything happens that was not supposed. So I think the MD appointment is an important one. During our tenure, what came across strongly for me personally is that we need to have member induction. If we talk about a BMF type manager, if we wanted to talk about developing programs, developing managers, then we need to do member inductions. And then also, I mean, I see there's a question that says, what initiatives, Tasneem, as the DP, what initiatives have you done to improve strategy? Again, you know, whatever I've done, I can't say that I've done it in isolation. But the fact that we did not have an MD for a period from August to January, between the president and I, we both contributed in that gap. We both were at national for, I mean, I was at national for weeks on end, months on end, just trying to keep that stability and you know, saw us through our first AGM as an example. So initiatives, when the previous MD left, there was this MBA, the Gibbs MBA was something that I had picked up. And I mean, I didn't know anything about it. There was no handover. And I think what we must really do is not blame anybody. We mustn't blame people. We must take collective responsibility from membership to board and say, why do we not have handover reports? Why is it that when an MD leaves, the computers are wiped out? Why is it that when we ask, where is the CUD of 1992, we don't have these DVDs? Where is our institutional memory? Do we even know that we don't have these things available to members as part of induction? That doesn't cost a cent. So I think it's quite important, the member induction. And then one of the strategies that we did do was to take the gender desk and elevate the women section into a woman empowerment desk. And then to say, well, how have we resourced not only the women empowerment desk, the SMME desk, how have we researched? We should also have a policy and research desk, because we should be able to work with other universities and hire researchers outside of the BMF I mean, at the moment, we only have one researcher. So we really need to look at composition as an organization in terms of corporatizing the BMF and running it effectively. What are our key outputs if we want the BMF that we say we deserve? So I've seen comments there about why should this leadership that have essentially failed us come back? Nobody on this platform needs to come back, guys. This is all in the hands of the members. We have local elections. If people want to queue for 3 hours and spoil their ballot, that is their choice. But let us exercise that right to vote. And also in the BMF BMF is very different. It's not a one man, one vote issue. And this to me speaks to ethics, and it speaks to us. When we talk about member induction, I'm talking also about how do we change the MOI to speak to things that, like what Lily has raised, ethics, an ethics charter, a document around when we have an elective charter. You know, we've heard about the CR17 campaigns. How do we then, learning from other leaders, ensure that we don't make that same mistake, and we really live a Black excellence, and we really live, you know, to be the type of manager that eventually leads countries. You know, we need to say, where's the next president, woman president, not of the BMF gonna come from, where's the next president of the country, of the republic going to come from? Because we cannot be having this conversation of why is BMF not having a woman in the last 43 years, when we're not saying we've never even had a woman president of the Republic of South Africa. So first we implement in our own organization, and then we go and we say, well, now we're working towards having a woman leader in the country leading a nation, because we have found that countries who fail are countries who fail women. So that is a very important issue. I'm not saying it's exclusionary, but if we look on a global, if we look at the statistics, if we look at the empirical data, it states that women, the gender parity is there's 102-year gap. So this is not to say that, and I know that we live in a patriarchal society, and there are members who are saying, well, if you're only going to focus on women, then you know what, we're not interested in this BMF because we feel like we're being excluded. So it goes back to member induction. It goes back to, why are we trying to convince people to do the right thing? Why is it that our membership needs to be convinced on what is the right thing to do? And if that is the type of membership that we're going to be leading, it's going to be ungovernable to a point where in the next 3 years, you're going to have the same questions being asked in terms of, you failed us once again, what have you done? So Kuma, I think for me, I'm just going to leave it there and thank everyone for their participation. It was very, very highly enlightening for me to hear everyone's views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DP. And again, let me thank all of the panelists for making the time to have this conversation and to have these conversations with each other. As it has played out here this afternoon, the key takeaway for me here is that we have a leadership cohort with a firm grasp on what the issues are and committed to resolving some of those. And perhaps this conversation can be the one of many where we take collective responsibility in resolving some of the issues that we have, build on the progress that we've made, and ultimately achieve the objectives that we want to achieve as an organization, both for it as an entity and for its members, most importantly. So I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. I'd like to thank all of the attendees for having asked questions of you and for you from responding to those in the way in which that you've had here this afternoon. It's truly enlightening, and I think we can all take some hope out of this conversation, that no matter what may happen, we have a cohort of leadership and a cohort of members who are committed to building this organization. At this point in time, since we've run out of time, I would like to hand over to the chairperson of the Eastern Cape, Uminti, to give us her closing remarks, and as well as just to close the program for us.
Thank you so much, Kuma. Colleagues, good afternoon. On behalf of the BMF and the PC in the Eastern Cape, I'd really like to thank each and every individual in here for your presence. It really conveys your commitment towards the socio-economic transformation agenda and keen interest, in seeing the BMF post 2021. It's a Sunday, but you colleagues have tuned in right till this moment. I sincerely thank Ukuma for doing such an incredible job in facilitating this conversation for us. I must say a lot of people were critical of the session and all sorts of suggestions were sent to us on how we should be running it, and a lot of whys were asked. So I can safely say that you handled very, very well. Thank you, Puti. I also wish to express our deep sense of appreciation to our panelists. I mean, when I approached all our panelists, all of them agreed to this session without hesitation. Tasneem, Nick, Zizi, Lily, and Ese too, thank you for honoring our invite and taking time to prepare. For me, it's been truly beneficial, and I'm sure all the members share the same sentiment. I think I'd just like to implore new colleagues to continue being active in the organization, as I feel that, you know, there's a lot of value we can derive. I've been receiving a lot of reviews on the session on my WhatsApp, and people are saying this is a great initiative. It should be an annual session where we do a review and rather taking stock. And also we should take the highlights out of here and create some action items. So a lot of people have benefited just like we have. So I know we're heading for elections, and you know, 2 individuals will emerge in November. So for me, the most important thing would be that we continue serving the organization in our respective branches and perhaps in committees. To the president, in absentia, I know he would have loved to attend, but something cropped up on the last minute. But I'd like to thank Unopula for his support. To the organizers of the event, the BMF staff who are here with us on a Sunday afternoon, led by the acting MD, Ufil, to make sure that the event happens, we truly, truly appreciate you. On that note, do enjoy the rest of your Sunday, colleagues, and good evening.